It's a lovely pleasure to welcome you along here tonight. The Old Baptist Church has organised this event, and we've welcomed you to our talk on Robert Boyle. Now, Robert Boyle is someone that I've been interested in for a number of years, but it's only recently that I've been able to get a couple of speakers or three guys together that are more experts on the subject than I am, certainly. So, Eileen Cronin from Cobh is a fellow Baptist. She studied history and English at UCC, later earning a master's in local history. Eileen is published author and a long-time volunteer tour guide at Fota House. Dr. Raymond Given, who's going to take part in the Q&A, studied pharmacy at Queen's Belfast before training as a teacher of chemistry and biology, later graduated with medicine, worked as a medical doctor, and more recently earned an MA in theology, and Raymond is a member of Ballymena Baptist Church. Dr. Reg Haslett then holds a degree in agriculture and chemistry from Queen's and a PhD in chemistry. He taught chemistry in Ballyclare and Wallace High Schools. Reg has served for some years as a hospital chaplain and continues to serve as a Church of Ireland reader. So we'll begin then with an introduction to the Boyle family by Eileen, before then we hear from Reg and Eileen comes back. Thank you, Eileen.
Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you very much for coming. As Paul said, my name is Eileen, so I'm going to give you a short introduction really to Robert Boyle, and of course he's very famously known as the father of modern science. A very wonderful man really, and a wonderful Christian as well. His father is probably well known by all of you as well, the great Earl of Cork, Richard Boyle. So as it says here, Robert was born in 1627 and he died in 1691. I suppose I first became familiar with Robert really through my tour guiding in Fota, because his sister Alice was married to David, the first Earl of Barrymore, from whom the Smith Barrys of Fota are descended. So in a way, Fota House mightn't be there at all without the Boyle family as well. The marriage between Alice and David was arranged actually by the Earl of Cork, because David was the Earl's ward growing up, and of course the Earl wanted to expand his power in Munster, and he thought it was a good idea to ally himself with the great Barry dynasty. So that was a very shrewd move. Alice was only 14 and David was 16 years of age. The wedding was held in Lismore Castle on the 29th of July, 1691. Through this marriage, Boyle, as I said, he closely allied himself with the Barry dynasty, and he was eager to expand his stronghold in Munster. I was also, of course, impressed by Robert Boyle's commitment to the Irish language and the way in which he generously gave of his resources to finance the printing of the Bible into Irish. I will speak just a little bit more about that. Now, I just want to say I'm not a great Irish speaker by any means. I only did Irish to Leaving Cert, but I appreciate what Robert Boyle did and how he spent his money as well. As a member of the ascendancy class, it was rather unusual to do such great benevolent and charitable work, and especially to be so interested in promoting the Irish language as well. In honour of Robert Boyle, therefore, I would like to quote from John's Gospel, chapter 3, verse 16, which expresses the truth that the gift of salvation and eternal life are for all who will follow in Jesus, God's one and only Son. And this is what Robert believed also. So I'll just read it in English first, and then I'll read it in Irish for you. God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. So I got a loan actually of a lovely New Testament in Irish. So Robert Boyle indeed loved them both, the Irish and the Bible. So Owen Capital 3 verse Shediag, mar vi gra dead on down commotion, go hug she uiga ein vak, on is not gali an te a credisown, akimiok an vaha hiri again. So we thank the Lord for that. Robert, he had both the intellect, the talent, the resources and the faith to become a great Anglo-Irish natural philosopher, chemist, physicist, alchemist and inventor. He was the brilliant mind who turned alchemy into science. So all the sources say about him. Anyway, I'm not a scientific expert either, so we'll leave Reg cover all that area. But in fact, Boyle was one of the most prolific figures in the scientific revolution and became the leading scientist of his day. He justifiably became known as the father of modern chemistry. He is revered most of all as the person who bridged science and fate. Before I speak about Robert's earlier life, I would like to give some relevant background information about his father, the great Earl of Cork. The Earl of Cork was born in Canterbury in Kent in 1566, and he died in Youghal in 1643. He was buried in Kent, but an elaborate 16th century tomb of the first Earl, his first and second wives, his mother also, I think, and his 15 children, including Robert, can be seen in St. Mary's Collegiate Church in Youghal. There is also a larger monument at the west end of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin, erected in 1632 by the great Earl. In this monument, Robert is depicted actually as a young boy kneeling in prayer. So he was actually very holy even when he was a boy, apparently. He used to pray a lot. Otherwise, Richard Boyle, he acquiring large tracts of land in plantations in Munster in the 16th and 17th centuries, he became one of the most powerful landowners and industrial magnates in Ireland, and indeed one of the richest men in the United Kingdom in the 17th century. He bought the lands of Sir Walter Raleigh in Cork, Waterford and Tipperary. He brought more settlers from England, mainly Bristol, and he founded Arden smelting and weaving industries. In 1595, he married Joan Apsley, who was the daughter of William Apsley of Limerick, and one of the council to the first president of the province of Munster. This marriage brought Boyle an estate of £500 a year, a sum which he continued to receive at least until 1632. Joan died in 1599 in childbirth. I don't think he had any children by his first marriage. In 1620, he was created Earl of Cork. In 1629, he was created Lord High Justice and Lord High Treasurer in 1631. The Earl lavishly decorated the castle of Lismore, which became his main residence in Ireland. He acquired Myrtle Grove in Youghal in 1602, which formerly had been the home of Sir Walter Raleigh, and this was situated close to the Collegiate Church of St. Mary's. Order on the Boyle estates was maintained in 13 castles, and please don't ask me now where the castles are, I'm not quite sure of that, but my historical source anyway, that order was maintained in 13 castles which were garrisoned by retainers. In 1625, the Earl took over the town of Bandon. He claimed that he founded Bandon actually, but that's not correct. Apparently he didn't. It was another gentleman, a few gentlemen actually, who founded Bandon, but he certainly took it over. As part of his municipal development, he also included Middleton, Castlemartyr, Charleville and Doneraile. Some years later, he bought Stalbridge Estate in Dorset, which became his main English residence. The Earl of Cork has been described as the first colonial millionaire, and his motto was, "God's providence is my inheritance." In July 1603, he married Catherine Fenton, daughter of Sir Geoffrey Fenton, Secretary of State for Ireland. Of course, marriages in those days were very strategic, usually leading to much more wealth and prestige. They had 15 children, 7 boys and 8 girls. Robert was their 14th child and 7th son. He was born on the 16th of January 1627. The Earl, according to the writer Thomas Birch, fervently prayed for his children that they would live long and virtuous lives. He was apparently very affectionate toward them and more forgiving of them than he was of his enemies. Apparently his daughter Mary married someone he didn't like, and he was upset over that, but he forgave her after all and gave her a great big dowry, I read. Robert anyway was going to do well. He was bright and intelligent apart from that, but he had a propensity to do good from an early age, and it was anathema to him to tell a lie. His sister, Lady Ranelagh, told a story, her name was Catherine, told a story that Robert was once accused of eating a dozen plums for a certain forbidden garden. Robert insisted that he had eaten a score of plums, which was very honest for a little fellow. Throughout his life, he pursued truth in all areas, scientific, theological or otherwise. His father, Richard, ensured that all of his children received the best upbringing and education possible. Tutors were a constant presence in the Boyle household. All of the Boyle children were brought up in the Anglican tradition. The Protestant Reformation was also very influential as it reasserted the authority of the Bible as a source and guide for holy living. As was typical of most aristocratic families at the time, some of the Boyle children, including Robert, were fostered out to local families at a young age. Robert's mother died in 1630 when he was only 2 years old. So I felt sorry for him when I read that, actually, poor fellow. So, but then he was fostered and taken care of by a local Irish woman known today as Nurse Allen. Here he began to learn the Irish language. When Robert was 8 years old, his father sent him to Eton and placed him under the care of Sir Henry Wotton, his tutor at the time. Robert became passionate about acquiring knowledge. In 1638, his father withdrew him from Eton College. For a time, he was educated privately at his father's estate in Stallbridge House in Dorset. This was later bequeathed to him, and it was here that he set up his famous science laboratory, but Reg will tell you more about that. At the age of around 12 years old, Robert was sent on a continental tour with his brother Francis under the tutelage of Isaac Marcombe, a renowned tutor from Switzerland. They visited France, Italy, and Switzerland, where Robert was based in the home of his tutor in Geneva. And I just mentioned, I know Reg is going to mention it also, God willing, but in 1642 he had this profound conversion, and it's very beautiful to read it actually in Thomas Birch's. He wrote 6 volumes about the life of Boyle, and I read some of those in the archive in UCC. But I'm sorry, actually, I haven't got the quote now in front of me, but I remember Boyle said it was the considerablest day of his life. There was a violent storm. He thought the end of the world was coming. He thought the day of judgment had arrived. So he cried out to God, and he said that Christ, who had been asleep in his conscience, suddenly woke up. And he made a vow that if he survived the storm, he would dedicate himself all the more diligently to his studies and to whatever endeavours he was engaged in, and follow the Lord more closely. Well, the quote didn't exactly say that, but he did date his conversion to Christianity from that time. So when the storm quietened down and peace was restored, he remembered his vow, and throughout his life, fair play to him, as we would say in Cork, he certainly kept his vow, I believe. So glory to God for that. Anyway, while Francis returned, I think, home around that time, while Robert was in Geneva, while they were, working and engaged in different activities, they enjoyed a lot of study, including French, Latin, Italian, geometry, Roman history, and philosophy. They also engaged in outdoor pursuits, including tennis, fencing, and horseback riding. Their father's incredible wealth enabled them to have the best of everything. Boyle spent 21 months in Geneva before setting out for Italy. It was from studying Italian and the work of Galileo that he became so interested in science. I think he wanted to meet Galileo, but unfortunately Galileo passed away before the meeting could be arranged. But he was certainly inspired by him. In 1643, Robert's grand tour came to an end when he heard the news that his father had died. Returning to England, he began to write a lot, and he began to prove that experimentation and science could be used in the defence of his Christian beliefs. He moved to Oxford, which provided him with probably the best intellectual company in the world. He was very blessed indeed. Now I will hand you over to Reg to hear more about Robert Boyle's science and fate. Thank you very much, Reg.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Eileen. It was a joy to listen to. I have to say that on behalf of everyone. Well, there's Robert Boyle, we already know, and considering he worked 400 years ago in developing the foundations of science, I mean, atoms, the existence of atoms wasn't really proved till about 150 years ago. So we were in the things known as alchemy, and it was mainly a mixture of hit and miss and magic. In a sense, and they didn't know what they were doing, and like most great discoveries, they're made by accident. And he was just as to reinforce what he said, I just thought he was a very complete person. very balanced. People like Newton were brilliant scientists, but totally eccentric and couldn't communicate with people. And I found when I was at university, some of the most brilliant minds couldn't lecture properly, and certainly couldn't have any small chat. They were really peculiar. But it would seem that he was an exceedingly balanced person, and I was very impressed with the stature of the man. This, as an apparatus, I used in school about 40 years ago or 50 years ago, and it's a pressure gauge. It's an old foot pump that you'd use for pumping up a car tire. There's this bit of wood, it's a glass tube, there's gas at the top of it and coloured oil. And you stood on this pump, pumped it up, and you pumped the oil up the tube to compress the oil. And then you measured the pressure and the volume. And you maybe took this 5 readings. So if you're any good, you could multiply those in your head, but to save you the trouble, I have put down the results for you. Okay, right? So you're let off the hook there. And you can see that within experimental error, they're the same, they're a constant. And this was Boyle found this out. And Boyle was very precise. What Eileen said, I remember reading that about the ridiculousness of being accused of telling a lie and eating the plums, he'd eaten 12 plums, and he wiped the slate clean and said, actually, he ate 20 plums. And that's learned as pressure over volume, and that was known as Boyle's law. And I learned that when I was a pupil, 15-year-old at school. I'd say he had an intellect close to Einstein's in caliber. He had a passion for God like Billy Graham, and he had a Mother Teresa type of compassion for the poor. To get that in one package, I think, is great. And he gave away, at that stage, 400 years ago, he was generous. He gave away £1,000, which was like 3 million today in one thing. He made new medicines, which he found which were effective. And when he'd made them, he didn't hog the recipe. He shared that. And he made the medicines, and he selected all the medicines, and he gave them out to the poor. He believed that the Bible was the Word of God, but he believed it was not a scientific textbook. Boyle saw that there was no conflict between the natural and supernatural truth. And that's something I'm very passionate about, because I was a total skeptic until my early 20s and understood science, but I soon found that there was no real conflict properly understood. There's still difficulties, but I think Boyle's understanding of the harmony between all of creation and different aspects was true 400 years ago, and to me it's true today. Basically, his work reflected in this idea of honesty about the plums. He was very precise. Many scientists have a theory, and they sort of try to shoehorn the results to fit the theory, their pet theory. But he was open-minded, and he had a very wide knowledge of so many different aspects of life, and that helped to give good judgment. And he shared his thoughts with honesty and clarity, and he did that both in America and Europe. And just basically, he did superb experiments, he was diligent, and he was wide-ranging in the sorts of studies that he undertook. He created the modern laboratory, he employed its methods, and he reproduced. He published his results openly for all people to read, and it was really the start of the publishing of papers. For example, I was just thinking of a simple example. The scientific method is you think two things are connected. You suspect that. So what do? Well, let's say plants growing, that plants grow faster at higher temperatures. So he would measure, say, plants growing at 20 degrees C and see how much they grew in 2 weeks. Then he would do the experiment again, and he'd do plants growing 2 weeks at 25 and then at 28 and so on, things like that. So he was precise, and he saw that the results supported what he was trying to say, and he modified it. So really, the important thing, he laid the foundation of science. And we think of, we're standing here in front of these data projectors and all these things and everything we take, mobile phones. That is a continuing chain of events happening bit by bit over hundreds of years. He went to Eton College, and he was sent there at age 8. But then he went on a grand tour, as Eileen has outlined in detail, where he hoped to meet Galileo, but sadly Galileo died just before he was able to see him. I've been in France, I've been in Switzerland a few times, but it was really a 2-week holiday. And I learned quite a bit about the country in 2 weeks. What do you learn about in 7 years? Especially with a great mentor. He took in the flavour of it. And it says that travel broadens the mind. And obviously, at a young age, when he was at a very impressionable stage, that obviously happened to him. So he was there for that 6-7 years with a Huguenot mentor who looked after him and introduced him to many things. Then just this thing struck me, and I was going to enlarge on this, was when he was in Geneva, there was a giant lightning storm. And I've only once or twice I've been on the continent when I encountered a lightning storm, and lightning storms in the middle of the continent are not the ones we get. They really are awesome. So obviously he was terrified. And he said he felt that the day of judgment was at hand. And obviously he'd been a very religious and prayerful boy. This impressed upon him. And he made this commitment. The rest of his life should be religiously and watchfully employed. When we're in trouble, we quite often make promises to God. Think back to your life when you've been up against it in some way, some family crisis, some personal crisis, health, economic, money-wise. No. But then looking back over the years since then, have you done what you told God you would do? But he did this. He did it. And that, in a sense, made him the man he was. And I was thinking back how crises in life actually do change us, or can do. John Wesley, the great Methodist preacher, he was coming back from America with the Huguenots in a boat. And Wesley went out to preach, but he wasn't really a believer. He was just an academic believer. He knew God in his mind, but not personally or in his heart. And he was quite terrified, and he reflected on this. Why were the Huguenots like that? John Newton is another notorious character, was a runaway. He was taken to sea. He was captured, on a ship, and he became really violent, and he got his own boat, and he was a feared slave trader, and he treated people with great cruelty. But he nearly died in a storm, and he cried out to God, and he was gloriously saved, and he of course composed the nation's favourite hymn, which is Amazing Grace. Yes, it's my favourite hymn. Yeah. Another one I just mentioned in passing was Blaise Pascal, who was a French genius, and he had a profound encounter with God at age 31. From half 10 to half 12 one night, he called it the night of fire. Fire of God away from God. It was like the day of Pentecost to him. And he was transformed. The middle years, again, I think he wrote back, he went back to Dorset and he wrote devotional tracts there. He met with other scientists of his day, Hooke, Francis Bacon and people, and they met just socially. They weren't in one college, and he called it his invisible college. And they went on to be the foundation members later of the Royal Society. But then after a while, he went back for a couple of years back to Ireland to look after the lands and of his father in Ireland and oversee that. And he began investigating human structure and dissected animals. But he couldn't get enough equipment when he was in Ireland. But look at the age he was there, from 17 to 21, and he did all those things. That's remarkable progress for such a young person, just into his 20s. He then went back from Ireland after he couldn't do his experiments, so he went back and he went back to Oxford. And this is what it said here. Now, I'm quoting this. I think I shouldn't have said this to an Irish grouping, but I'm Irish too. And I said, he was frustrated at his inability to progress chemistry. He said that Ireland was a barbarous country where chemistry was so misunderstood and instruments and apparatus so unavailable. So he returned to Oxford and became acquainted with people like Christopher Wren. Robert Hooke, another great scientist who was very talented. He's noted for the first discovery of cells. He looked down a microscope at cork bark and he found all these little cubes. And he was really I learned that in biology when I was a pupil at school. But his main thing, obviously, meeting other people and cooperating with them enabled him to make great progress. So making a vacuum pump would not have been an easy thing to do. So he had people like the talented Robert Hooke to help him. And then the Royal Society of Chemistry was formed in 1660, and the early members of this invisible club which came together to form the Royal Society was Francis Bacon, Christopher Wren, Robert Boyle himself, and they made informally. And their motto is nullius in verba, which I'd never heard of. Is there any Latin scholars here? Yeah, I knew you'd know that. Yeah. I tried that. Take nobody's word for it. Yes. It reminds me of a funny story. True, sad. There was a lecturer at Queen's 50 years ago. I called him Mr. Bacon. I've forgotten his first name now. But he had a certain student from Asia, somewhere in Asia. That's why I'm going to keep it general. He'd done his research. He had written up his thesis, and he went back to his country in Asia. And Mr. Bacon, Dr. Bacon, got this new research student to familiarise himself with the work, and he began to do a couple of the last experiments his last student had done, and he couldn't get it to work, you see. So he then contacted the student back in the country in Asia, and he got this reply: I was running out of time, I needed to complete my thesis, so I just made those ones up. Yes. That happens more often than you think, by the way. Yeah. But he wasn't like that. Yeah. Take nobody's word for granted. That was his motto, and that's amazing. In his archives, apparently, he had written 46 volumes of philosophical scientific papers, and he had 7 volumes of his old correspondence in the archives of the Royal Society. Pall Mall residence. He lived there with his sister Catherine at the age of 41, and he employed many assistants to work with him, and he published, apart from doing all these other things, he published at least 1 book a year in addition to that. At 42, his health began to fail, and he began to withdraw from public engagements, and there's only certain days of the week or mornings where he was available to meet other people. Why did that happen at 42? I don't know. I suspect that possibly he's worked so hard and traveled so much that he'd worn himself out. That's my suspect. You any insight on that, Eileen?
He died just a week after his sister, and they were very, very close intellectually, and they were great companions for each other. So some sources say he died of grief as well.
Yes. Yes, that when he came to yes, that's right. When he was 53, the Royal Society had been formed 20 years earlier, and he was offered first to be the president of it, and he turned that down. I think the King Charles also offered him a bishopric, and he turned that down. Whether his health wasn't up to, I suspect it might have been part of his humility. Part of his, he did this because he loved doing it. He didn't do it to become important. I think that's great admiration in my eyes. His health issues. It says in later life he became repeatedly unwell, weak hands and eyes. I mean, to be a scientist and making observations, to have that affliction, I mean, it must have been so frustrating for him. It said that he had 1 or more strokes. He never mind, and he died at 64. He was buried in St. Martin's in the Field, a church actually I visited quite a few years ago in central London. And he died a week after he's friendly with 2 of his sisters who had rather difficult marriages, and he died a week later. And his lectures in defense of Christianity, even today, are known as Boyle's lectures. I think there was a period when they sort of didn't always happen, but they were regenerated, I think, in 2011. So he has this defense of Christianity, and all right.
Thanks, Reg, very much. That was wonderful. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Well, I'm just going to give you a brief outline. Actually, to be quite honest, I was in the supermarket one day and I happened to pick up this magazine, The History of Ireland, and lo and behold, there's an article in it about printing Robert Boyle's Irish type. So that was my main source. And there's a lovely picture here of William Bedell's Bible. I'll mention him. And this is Robert Boyle at this side here. So, Boyle and the Bible. In the course of his studies, Robert became aware of a William Bedell, Bishop of Kilmore, who around the year 1641 had completed a translation of the Old Testament into Irish. Robert was only about 14 years at this stage and studying in Eton. Bedell wanted to have his work printed, but because there was no suitable Irish character typeface available, he sought to have a new type prepared. However, his efforts were disturbed by the Irish Rebellion of 1641 and abandoned after his death in 1642. Later on, Boyle decided to take on board Bedell's unfinished work. Actually, Boyle, for a period of time, he was very reluctant actually to learn Irish, but his father, the Earl of Cork, surprisingly encouraged him very much to do so. And obviously he must have become very interested in it later on as he took on this project, finishing Bedell's work. With the assistance of a Jesuit scholar, Andrew Sall, Bedell's manuscript was prepared for printing. Boyle was obliged to have a new font of Irish type prepared for the purpose. He describes this himself as the letters I caused to be cast. In 1680 to 1685, Boyle gave generously of his finances to have the Bible printed in Irish, both Old and New Testaments. I probably overlap, but Reg now said much more than I'm saying, but I just mention it again. He also contributed to the expense of translating the Bible into various other languages, including Arabic and Turkish, and thank you, Reg, for all those that you mentioned that I didn't. He also financed the printing of Good News Gospel tracts and other Christian literature. As director of the East India Company, Robert spent large sums of money in promoting the spread of Christianity in the East. He believed in the absolute authority of the Bible, God's word, that is, that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, Romans 10:13, because he believed that, salvation was for everybody. The Irish translations of the Bible were also distributed in the Scottish Highlands. Henry Jones, Bishop of Meath, praised Boyle's bounty in printing at his own expense and expressed his desire that the nation may know their obligation to so worthy a benefactor. Robert Boyle, as I said before, he differed from other members of the ascendancy class in Ireland at the time, many of whom, including his own brothers, oppressed the native Irish people and opposed the use of Irish. In his preface to the New Testament, Sall stated that God has raised up the generous spirit of Robert Boyle, Esquire, who had caused the same book of the New Testament to be reprinted at his proper cost, and as well for that purpose as for printing the Old Testament and what other pious books shall be thought convenient to be published in the Irish tongue, has caused a new set of fair Irish characters to be cast in London, and an able printer to be instructed in the way of printing this language, unquote. Sall prepared the designs, which were modelled directly on the fonts used by the Irish Franciscans in their press at their college in Louvain. Boyle turned to Joseph Moxon, a mathematician colleague and type founder trading in London, to prepare his type. So it was known as the Moxon Hibernian type. Moxon too had been elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society. In fact, Moxon and Boyle were born and they died in the same year. He was not particularly known for the excellence of his punch cutting, but in this instance, sometime between 1678 and 1680, he set a cut of punches of small pica Irish characters. These were the Hibernian characters that accurately met Boyle's requirements. The type was used for the first time in 1680 by the London printer Robert Everingham to produce the Catechism on Teagas Christaha. It was used the following year for the second edition of William O'Donnell's translation of the New Testament, and in 1685 for William Bedell's translation of the Old Testament, for which purpose had been prepared. I think there were a few translations. There was on Tahar Padre O'Leary as well, brought out a Bible at some stage. Later in 1712, it was used to print the Book of Common Prayer, and being the only Irish font available in Ireland and England, it became, to the limited extent that it was required, the standard for printing Irish text for over a century. Boyle also published a book in 1690 entitled Christian Virtuoso, which is a summary of his Christian beliefs. The title page of this book is called Greatness of Mind, Promoted by Christianity. Here Boyle asserts that greatness of mind is not hindered by Christianity, as some people believe that, Christianity might slow you down or hinder your progress in some way. But he believed Christianity promoted it. As far as he was concerned, quote, man owes a high veneration to God, especially for his wisdom and power, unquote. Now, I'd just like to mention part of one of his mottos. God would not have made the universe as it is unless he intended us to understand it. Nature always looks out for the preservation of the universe. From a knowledge of his work, we shall know him. I'll just conclude now with Psalm 104 verse 24, which was one of Boyle's favourite verses as far as I know, and which glorifies God as the author and creator of everything. How many are your works, O Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Boyle believed in the one true God, Yahweh of the Bible, who was outside creation, whereas a lot of his contemporaries in the world of that day thought that nature itself was a type of goddess, and that goes back to the era of the Greeks. And Boyle viewed that as a type of idolatry, in the sense that matter was semi-divine. It was a lesser God. And basically, he believed in Father God, not Mother Nature. And in his understanding, which is a biblical one, is that God was outside the earth. God's everywhere. But God existed before anything else existed. So God was not part of nature. That's a pantheon viewpoint. So he said they were totally different. So the zigzag line there is to show a clinical separation. And then because God is outside nature and he has made the laws of nature, he can, at his own will, sometimes in response to prayers, sometimes not, he can suspend them. So miracles are possible. And I suppose the one in the Bible, which I'm referring to here, is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. Although the flames were still there, God was quite capable and did obviously suspend the traditional laws of nature. So though the flames were in the furnace, the heat was stopped getting to those three people. Yeah, so that was Boyle's argument. So I'm going to look at briefly defense of Christianity in the scientific age. If you want some in-depth and simple teaching, is Dr. John Lennox. He's a brilliant communicator. He's a polymath too. He speaks Russian and numerous languages, and he's in his early 80s. He is an amazing man. His delivery is so simple, and that is a sign of greatness. Einstein said, anybody can go from the simple to a complex. It requires great inventiveness to go from the complex to the simple. And again, in line of Boyle, Einstein said that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. You need to think about that one. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is this comprehensible. It's understandable. And Dr. James Tour is a biochemist and a chemist. He looks about the origin of life. And again, he's profound. By the way, you need to know a bit about biochemistry to follow him, so unless you've got a wee bit of biochemistry, you might want to skip him. But Dr. John Lennox, nearly for anybody. Right, the foundations. Why did science arise in the Christian West? And it's really because of this teaching that God is understandable. We're made in the image of God. We feel anger and frustration. God feels anger and frustration about the world. We're made in his image. He feels the passionate way we feel about everything. You see the news being misrepresented. God feels disgust at that too. Picking what would have been the two greatest universities in the world, actually they're dropping in their rankings quite a bit in the last 10, 15 years in world esteem. But Oxford, there's the crest of Oxford, Dominus Illuminata Mei. The Lord is my light. It's a verse from Psalm 27. The Cavendish Laboratory, inside the Cavendish Laboratory, over the door is this. The works of the Lord are great, sought out by all of them who have pleasure in them. A verse from Psalm 111. Defense of Christianity. Boyle's experiments were to try and unravel the mysteries of the natural physical world. That's what he was trying to do. There's another Kepler. What was another Johannes Kepler, the father of astronomy? His motive was, he said, I am merely thinking God's thoughts after him. Isaac Newton, I think undisputably the greatest scientist of all time. He was real oddball. He was ADHD on steroids, I think, really. I mean, he discovered the laws of gravity and he worked them out. You know, the legend is he was sitting and an apple fell on his head. Well, that's true or not. But he took that thought and he realized the moon was falling towards the earth. You said the moon is not falling towards the earth. It's up there. Yeah. Oh, but it is, you see. If you get a ball and throw it, it'll go to there and it'll land over that wall. if you shoot a bullet, it'll go 3 miles, a good gun. If you shoot something fast enough at 18,000 miles an hour, it falls towards the earth, but as it's going forward, the curve of the earth falls, but the earth curve of the earth on below it, so it's always falling, but it's always missing the earth. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the moon is falling towards the earth, but because it's going round, it's continually missing it. Well, you can think about that later if you haven't got it all. But use the laws of gravity that Newton discovered in 1666 was the same laws we used to calculate how to send man to the moon in 1969. That's how revolutionary it was. But Newton was also a fantastic Christian. He said his Christian writings and thoughts were more important than his scientific ones. So hence I've made the scroll bigger than the rocket, to show the relative importance in that one. Another great character is that he was in the Oval Office in 2003, and when they actually were the first published result of the human genome, the whole DNA code, and he's a great Christian. As Francis Collins, if you go to YouTube and you put in Francis Collins and R.T. Kendall, they sing a duet about Genesis. It's hilarious, and musically it's not bad. R.T. Kendall and Francis Collins, that's Francis Collins, and he was the first one that unraveled it. The most thing about life is, where did the information come from? Crick and Watson in 1953 discovered the DNA double helix, and there was 4 different characters in it, A, C, T, G, and these like letters. And these letters are combined in different ways to make words. The words are put together to make sentences, sentences make paragraphs, make chapters, make books, and make you and me. That's what it is. So there's a bit of code. The screen's not wide enough. Where do you think that would stop in reality? How far away do you think it is? Dublin? North of Scotland? The answer is probably New York, maybe a bit further. There's 3.4 billion characters. That's an incomprehensible number. If I had said 3.4 million, you're not any more impressed by me saying 3.4 billion and 3.4 million. They're different spelling, and you know a billion is greater than a million. All right? Let's think of it through reality. Let's try and get a picture. Right? If you counted to a million, 1, 2, 3, once a second, how long would it take you? It would take you about 12 days. You don't really sleep away, you go day and night. If you want to count to a billion, it's a bit longer. It would take you 33 years. Where did that information come from? Did it happen by chance? When you see information, you immediately say intelligence. You're walking along the beach in Port Stewart there, we're looking at Port Stewart beach there, and then you go along some morning, and in the damp sand, you see someone's got a stick by the finger, and they've written down that John loves Mary. And you look at that, and you think, where did that come from? Well, the tide came in at a funny speed this morning, and the wind was in a strange direction, and that's just happened by chance. That's 13 characters, actually, I think. And you immediately see in 13 characters there has to be intelligence behind them. How much intelligence do you need to make 3.4 billion? Right, the problem with the Big Bang, that's the beginning. Time started, the clock started ticking. There was space, and there was matter. A trinity. All 3 had to happen at the same time. That makes sense? Well, let's go to the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So there was a beginning, that verse, which time started, corresponding to point 1 at the top. The heavens was the space, space was formed, and 3, matter appeared. You had to have, if you know space, there had to be, at that stage, energy was formed. If you know anything about energy, what do you know about energy? You cannot, according to observations today, you cannot create energy or destroy it. You only change it from one form to another. And when you change it to one form, you get a lower grade of energy. And the worst sort of energy is heat. And so when your electric motors go and you get movement, electricity is used up, you get motion, but you also get a bit of heat. But if you take all those heat bits and all put them together, what you start with and what you end up is the same, it's just in different form. And the same with atoms. You cannot destroy or create matter. You can only rearrange it. Like a jigsaw bit, you can move it around. So Where did it come from? It had to come from another realm. The word for create in Genesis is to create something out of nothing. That's what it means. It doesn't mean make a cake from the recipe you bought in Tesco's. It means to make something out of nothing. Obviously, God made it, but he was in a different dimension. There's a book written in 1888 by Abbott, John Abbott, and he wrote about people who live in flatland. They live in two dimensions, like a plain sheet of paper, and they're like ultra-thin gingerbread men. And that's the world they lived in. They didn't know up or down. They just lived in two dimensions and not three dimensions. So there's a sheet of paper, okay, and you bring your hand just above it, just a fraction above it. Do the flatlanders know you're there? They don't, because they can't see up or down. If I put my hand in through flatland, do they see a hand coming in? No, they see 5 circles in their ground, in their sheet. Where do these 5 circles come from? You know, if I put it further down, they just see a big circle, which is my wrist. They can't see 3 dimensions. So how is a 3-dimensional person going to communicate with flatlanders? How can I talk to flatlanders and I have a 3-dimensional person and they live in 2 dimensions? Become a flatlander. What did God do? He became a man and he moved amongst us. And that's me finished, unless there's any more questions.